the gallery view where you have all of us up here, you can actually pin whoever is speaking. So it'll be me first and then Erin. If you all are not familiar with Zoom, you can go to the upper right-hand corner of the image of the person talking. So it would be me right now. Click on the three little dots that show up and say pin speaker. Or you can go to speaker view, which will just bring whoever is making noise up into the main view there. So welcome to our first online edition of the Wild Neighbors Speaker Series. This is a partnership of the City and County Balcones Canyonlands Preserve. We actually began this in 2017 as a in-person speaker series that had a hike component to it. We partnered with Concordia University that was in their classrooms, and we did the hike on the part of the BCP that is actually on their campus. But since, of course, we're all social distancing now, we decided to turn it into a webinar series, and this is our first one. And so thank you for joining us for our maiden voyage here. And we're hoping to do them about once a month going forward. So if you have ideas for topics that you'd like to hear about, please let us know. So let me just tell you a little bit about the BCP before we move on to our main speaker here today. So let's see. There we go. Okay, so this is a map of the Balcones Canyonlands Preserve, and it's really massive. It's about 50 square miles, over 32,000 acres, and you can see it's a patchwork of different colors on here, and that's because there are so many different partners that have come together to make this a reality. It was established first in 1996 as a part of an agreement with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that allowed for endangered species habitat in Western Travis County to be developed through a mitigation program. So you can't just go ahead and develop it, but there is an expedited way to develop areas that have endangered species habitat in exchange for setting aside all of this really great habitat in these large areas as part of the preserve. And all those different colors represent the different partners. So purple is Travis County, the darker green is City of Austin. So you can see those are the two largest land managers. And then we also have Nature Conservancy, Travis Audubon, a lot of partnerships with, like, for example, Wild Basin is co-managed by Travis County and St. Edward's University. So lots of different parties coming together to make this happen. And we actually have an interactive map at that address, which I was gonna bring up, but I think it might just throw a little bit too much of a wrench in it, but it's a pretty easy URL. It's traviscountytx.gov/BCP map. It's interactive. You can zoom in and click on any of those parcels to see what kind of access they may have. And right now we actually have had to really suspend our volunteer and guided hike program, and also close areas like Hamilton Pool, which would normally be open because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but we are looking at the possibility of, how to reopen those in the future, but don't have any concrete plans yet. So the preserve, here are the species. The preserve was created to protect 8 endangered species and 27 species of concern. We've got over on the left here the 2 migratory songbirds, the golden cheek warbler and the black-capped vireo. They are here right now. They've got little babies that have fledged, and they are helping to train how to get their own food and everything. The black-capped vireo was delisted in 2018, and we are continuing to provide habitat for that bird. Can tell you a lot more about that if you're interested. Over on the right, we've got the 6 karst invertebrates. So these are insects and arachnids that live in caves. And we have a lot of caves through this whole area. And so those are going to be really important for the underground ecosystem. And but in addition to protecting these specific species, by protecting the most vulnerable, the ones that become endangered the fastest, we actually really end up protecting the entire ecosystem. And so you can see here the broad range of wildlife that we see every day on the preserve. I have been working in conservation for a very long time in Texas, and I've never honestly seen as many different kinds of animals and plants as I have on the preserve working here the last 4 years. So it's really a treasure. So because it's such a large preserve, and it's basically an urban preserve, we're surrounded by neighbors, and it's a really wonderful way for people to live amongst nature, but it also creates some issues where people might encounter some wildlife they're not totally familiar with. We get a lot of questions, and there's also a lot of opportunity for people to kind of extend the habitat in their own backyards by making simple choices about how you're managing your land. So that was the inspiration behind the Wild Neighbors series, is to connect people with speakers who are, very knowledgeable about these different aspects of wildlife that we have here in this really amazing region, and just provide a forum for people to ask questions and get to know us better. And so we're really excited to start off the first one with Erin from Bat Conservation International, who is going to be talking to us about the bats that we find here in Central Texas, and also what we can do to help them thrive. So take it away, Erin.
Okay, I think you have to unshare your screen and then I can share mine.
Good point. All right. Here we go.
No worries. Okay. All right, does that look good? Everyone's here? Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming. Thank you, Johanna, for the intro. My name is Erin, as she said. I am the Bat Walk Network Coordinator for Bat Conservation International. The Bat Walk program is BCI's primary education and outreach program. And today I'm going to talk to you guys about the bats of Central Texas. I'm going to talk about some bat basics first, then go into the species that we have here that are commonly found, and then ways you can kind of make your yard more bat friendly. So, okay, there we go. Quickly, I just wanted to talk about coronavirus and bats. I know there's a lot of kind of information out there right now, a lot of misinformation. People are really confused. I will say I'm not an expert on this at all. So if you do have a lot of coronavirus questions, you can definitely email me. My email's at the end of this presentation, and I can hand that email off to our science team, and they are super smart and can answer all your questions. But I will say we're not sure yet if the origin of coronavirus is from bats. If it is from bats, it's from a specific genus of bats that's found in Asia. So none of our North American bats are associated with coronavirus. They're not carriers of coronavirus. And you can't catch coronavirus from a bat. You can only catch it from a person. So that's kind of all I wanted to say. But if you do have questions, please feel free to email me. Okay. So kind of jumping off of that, bats in our culture have really kind of had negative associations for a long time. And I think, it's gotten better over the years for sure, but I think a lot of people still are very much afraid of bats. There's a lot of kind of myths and things out there about bats that really aren't true. So these are just some movie posters from back in the day, and some are more recent about just bats being scary. Bats are scary. So these are some of the really common bat myths that you will hear, and people will tell you these with complete sincerity, swear that they are true. You can debunk them now because they're not, and I will tell you why. The first is that bats are blind. I'm sure you guys have heard the phrase blind as a bat many times. Bats are not blind. They can actually see pretty much as well as we can, but they can also echolocate, which is how they get around at night because they are nocturnal. It's where they use sound to actually navigate and to find their prey. So it's kind of like a superpower. So they're definitely not blind. People will tell you that bats are flying rats with wings or rodents with wings. This is also not true. Bats are not rodents. They're mammals like rodents, like us, but they're actually more taxonomically closely related to horses than rats, which I know is crazy to think about, but that is how it shakes out. So definitely not rats with wings. People will tell you that bats want to nest in your hair or want to get in your hair. Kind of old school, not quite sure where this comes from, but bats definitely don't want to nest in your hair. They don't nest in human hair. They can echolocate very well. They can actually detect something as fine as one human hair, just to give you an idea of how good they are at it. So they're not going to fly at your head. They're not going to crash into you by accident. They're very good flyers. They don't want anything to do with your hair, generally. A lot of people will tell you that all bats are vampire bats, or that they want to suck your blood, or that they're going to attack you. To this I say there's over 1,400 species of bats, probably more than that now, in the entire world, which is amazing. Think of all that diversity. Only 3 of those 1,400 are actually vampire bats, and then only 1 of the 3 specializes in mammals. The other 2 specialize in birds and other wildlife. So there's only 1 species of bats out of probably more than 1,400 now that could potentially be, a quote unquote vampire bat for people. They usually kind of focus on livestock, so they are a problem with ranchers, and they're all found in Latin America. So we don't have any vampire bats here in North America. The last is that people think all bats have rabies, or that bats carry rabies more commonly than other species of wildlife. This is also not true. Bats can have rabies, just because any kind of mammal can have rabies too. They don't have it more than anything else, but you know, it's really good to use common sense. So if you do encounter a bat during the day, if it's acting weird, if it looks sick, if it's on the ground, you want to wear gloves. You know, you want to tell kids not to pick up bats. You just want to use common sense, because they don't have rabies more than other things, but they can have rabies, so you just want to be cautious. So those are those kind of 5 common bat myths that you hear. So as I said, there's over 1,400 bat species in the world, which is amazing. And it's going up all the time, actually, which is really cool. We're still learning so much about bats. But as you can see from this slide, a lot of bats are at risk or understudied. The first bullet, 18 to 31% of the species in the United States are considered at risk. That number has gone up since this study. And then in the entire world, there's a lot of bats that are critically endangered, or vulnerable, and then a lot that are data deficient. So we really need to work to understand these bats so we can protect and preserve them, because they are facing a lot of threats and issues. Now, as I said, bats are mammals just like us. And this is a really cool picture because it shows you kind of how the bones in the bat's wing correspond exactly to the bones in our arm and our hand. And they're actually in the order of mammals called Chiroptera, which means hand wing in Latin. So as you can see, this just shows it again. The bones in the hand actually correspond exactly to the bones in the wing correspond exactly to the bones in our hand. And someone told me once, you can kind of imagine bats flying around with like jazz hands all the time. It's a good way to think about it. So I kind of love that analogy. So it's very cool. They're the only flying mammals too, which is amazing. As I said, they echolocate. They are very good at that. So bats are basically screaming all the time when they're out flying. So imagine if you're at Congress Avenue Bridge. Now it's a really high frequency, so we can't hear it, but they are screaming. So it must be so loud at Congress Avenue Bridge, but we just can't hear it. That's because they're shooting out sound, and the sound bounces off their prey or their objects, and that's how they find their prey at night, and that's how they get around. So it's a really amazing kind of superpower that bats have. So why are bats important? Lots and lots of reasons. Before I even get into it, I just want to say, you know, I think bats are important just because they have intrinsic value, because they are wildlife, because they're amazing, because they exist. But they also are really awesome at pest control. One study found that they save US farmers annually $23 billion in pest control because they eat so many moths and other things that are really bad ag pests. So they're keeping, you know, the use of pesticide down for our farmers, which is fantastic for us. It means less chemicals in our food. It also means that the food costs less and there's less crop damage too. And they eat a lot of other bugs that are considered pests as well. You know, a lot of bats will eat mosquitoes, as people will tell you. So they're really fantastic at pest control. And all of our bats in North America and all of our bats in Texas, except for 2, are insectivorous, which means they eat bugs. So they're doing us a great service. A lot of bats are pollinators too. They're really important pollinators. They solely are the pollinators of the agave plant, which, as you can see by this amazing equation, agave plus bats equals tequila. So next time you have a margarita, you can thank a bat for that. But they also pollinate about 500 different species of ecologically and economically important plants, including the wild types of a lot of our favorite fruits. So like bananas and guavas and mangoes, they pollinate the wild versions of these, which go into the genetic diversity of the crops that people grow. So thank bats for all of that. They're also really important seed dispersers as well. In tropical forests, there's a lot of areas that are clear cut, unfortunately for farming or for other reasons. And you have kind of these large swaths of land where nothing is growing. And a lot of wildlife won't cross that because, you know, you're very vulnerable to predators if you're going to cross that. But seed dispersing bats will fly across at night, and in their droppings, they will drop plants or they will drop seeds, which become these pioneer plants, which are the first things to grow in these clear-cut areas. So I think it's about 95% of the first growth in clear-cut forests is from bat seed dispersal, which is really amazing. So they're so important for tropical forest regeneration. And then bats face a lot of threats, and this could be a whole PowerPoint in itself, but I'm gonna try to keep it short. There's a lot of issues bats are facing, kind of some of the main ones, pathogens pretty much related to white nose syndrome. So white nose syndrome it's a disease associated with a fungus. It was first discovered in New York in 2006. If you look at this map, you can see this purple area here. Can you guys see my cursor? Yeah, okay, great. This purple area here was the first place it was discovered in New York, and you can kind of see every year since then it's just moved across the country. And unfortunately, white nose, it does kind of create this white around the muzzle, but the fungus also forms lesions on the bat's skin and on their wings. And that causes them to not, it's for bats that are hibernating, it affects their ability to hibernate, and they keep waking up and they use all their energies that's been stored for their hibernation, and it actually causes them to starve to death. So it's really detrimental to a lot of our hibernating bats. There was a study done in 2012 that estimated about 6 million bats had died from white nose, and obviously that was 8 years ago, so the number is much higher now. It's been quite devastating to a lot of our hibernating bats. Wind energy is also another kind of interesting, controversial thing that has caused a lot of bat fatalities as well. It's tough because wind energy, we love clean energy, we love renewable energy, but for whatever reason, we're not quite sure exactly, bats seem to be attracted potentially to the turbines, or they kind of just seem to get hit by the wind turbines often. And this really affects kind of our long-term, long-distance migrants. So things like the hoary bat, this guy here, eastern red bat, things that are migrating long distances seem to be very much impacted by these wind turbines, and there's a lot of fatalities there too. I should say the wind industry is working to try to figure this out. We actually have a wind program within Bat Conservation International where we're trying to kind of work with the wind industry to figure out ways to kind of reduce fatalities for this. Climate change, obviously it's impacting everything. It's impacting bats as well. Things like kind of overheating, extreme temperatures, extreme heat, extreme cold are causing issues with bats. Timing and food availability during migration and things like that. And also availability of water as well. And then habitat loss, thankfully there are places like the BCP, but there's lots of places, that are being developed very quickly. A lot of bats are tree bats, and they rely on old growth forests or, a lot of different kinds of habitats. And unfortunately, we're losing a lot of habitat all throughout the world. So a lot of different threats, a lot of information. I know that's a lot. If you have questions, feel free to ask. I'll answer them after. Okay, so switching gears to Texas bats. Texas has, quote unquote, 33 species of bats in the state, which is, I think, the most of any state, which is cool, so go Texas. I will say it's probably more like 32. Someone did find a mummified vampire bat in South Texas after a hurricane once. So that's why it's 33, but it's really 32 because they're not actually found here. But in Austin, we have about 10 species that are pretty common, and I'm just gonna try to go through them pretty quickly and just talk to you about them real quick. So the first is the eastern red bat, which I love. This is a male eastern red bat. They have this gorgeous kind of orangey red coat, really beautiful bats. They love, love, love beetles. They are beetle specialists. These guys are tree-loving bats. They tend to roost. They'll hang by 1 foot and then curl up, and they kind of look like a dead leaf, so that's their camouflage. They're usually very solitary, so they're not usually encountered by people, but you will sometimes in the summer see the mama eastern red bat with her pups with her, and they're very cool because they can actually have, some bats usually have between 1 to 2 babies usually, but these guys can have 4 to 5, which is crazy because that's a lot for a bat. And if you think about it, the mama has to carry the babies around while she's foraging, so imagine being weighted down by 5 baby bats. Pretty amazing. So that's the eastern red bat. They do migrate. As I said, they are kind of one of the bats whose populations have declined due to wind energy. So that's something that, people are studying and trying to keep an eye on. But just a beautiful, wonderful bat that I love. Okay, oops, I lost my, there we go. The next is the northern yellow bat. This guy is one of our larger bats that we have here. They do not migrate. As you can see, they kind of hang around just in the southern United States. They're really commonly associated with Spanish moss and with palm trees. And I'm going to talk about proper palm tree care in a second, but just keep that in mind. Northern yellow bat, palm trees. I will get back to it. Next is the Seminole bat. This is another solitary bat that also really loves Spanish moss. They are tree roosting bats as well. And they like to forage in kind of larger open areas. So you may see these guys at streetlights at night kind of foraging, looking for insects there. Very cute too. They're all cute, right? The next is the hoary bat. They got their name from hoarfrost, no matter what you might think. Hoarfrost is this stuff right here. It's kind of when ice crystals form on the trees, and it's just really beautiful. It makes these beautiful kind of configurations. And the hoary bat, you see it's got this kind of like frosty tips to their fur, so that's where they get their name. These guys are long distance migrants, so these are ones that again are very impacted by wind energy. They are migratory, they are solitary, and they usually eat moths, but they will eat mosquitoes. If there's lots of mosquitoes, they will eat mosquitoes. So we love hoary bats for many reasons, but that's definitely one. The next is the evening brat, this little chocolate brown buggy here. These guys are migratory as well. They're actually considered endangered in Indiana, so their populations are kind of being monitored everywhere. That's the only state so far where they are considered endangered. These guys don't live very long compared to other bats. They only live about 2 to 5 years, which isn't really long in the grand scheme of bat lives. There was one bat, they don't exactly know how long all bats live. There was one study done with a myotis in Germany where they tagged it and then they found it 42 years later. So it's at least 42 years old. So that kind of gives you an idea of kind of the diversity of bat lives kind of that is out there. These guys love beetles as well. They will form maternity colonies in the summer. So this could be one you could have in your bat house, which is really cool. Probably not the most common one, but you could get these in your bat house. The silver-haired bat is another migrant that's having issues with wind energy too. They're very reliant on old growth forests, so a lot of old growth forest destruction has really hit this bat pretty hard. These guys really only come to Texas in the winter to overwinter, or they'll kind of move through in the spring and the fall, so we don't have them here in the summer. But sometimes they'll rest kind of on buildings or in wood piles, and that might be when you would encounter them in Texas, but they're not super common. And then the big brown bat, which I love. These guys are super cute, super chunky, robust bat. They are also beetle specialists too. They will form nursery colonies in the summer, so this is another one you could potentially get in your bat house, which is very cool. These guys, they do hibernate. They can actually survive sub-freezing temperatures, which is really amazing. Most bats cannot, but big brown bats can. They have been impacted by white nose, but they seem to handle it a lot better than a lot of other bats, and we're not quite sure why. It may have something to do with their size. I'm not really sure, but their populations are actually doing better than a lot of other hibernating bats. And then the cave myotis, as you can guess by the name, likes to hang out in caves. They will also hang out in other places too, like buildings, culverts, sometimes swallow nests too, which is really cool. They'll actually use swallow nests as a roost. These are often found with our Mexican freetails in these giant colonies, like in Austin and Bracken. You will have cave myotises in there as well. And I will say, unfortunately, we had our first bat death from white nose this year in Texas, and it was a cave myotis that was found dead. So that's something people are really keeping an eye on and looking out for right now. Very unfortunate, but we kind of knew it was coming. Then the tricolored bat, formerly Eastern pipistrelle. These are one of my most favorite bats. They're super, super tiny. We used to call them pips because they were pipistrelles, which I think is a really great nickname. The tricolor name is actually pretty apt. You can't really tell from the picture, but their hair actually is 3 different colors. So there's kind of like a dark color at the bottom, closer to the skin, then it's light in the middle, and then kind of dark at the tip. These guys do hibernate, so these guys have been very impacted by white nose, unfortunately. They're pretty common in Texas caves. I would say caves on the BCP. I used to work there back in the day, and we used to see tricolor bats occasionally, which is really cool. And sometimes with the humidity in the cave, they will have this kind of dew form on their fur, and it looks like they have kind of a sparkly coat on, which is really neat. And they'll actually drink the dew while they're hibernating, which is cool. And then last, but certainly not least, the most abundant bat in Texas, the state bat of Texas, the Mexican freetail. It depends on where you are in the country. Some people will call this a Brazilian freetail. It's the same bat. I had somebody yell at me and argue with me that it was a different bat. They're the same bat, just a different name. This genus is also known as the wrinkle-lipped bats, and you can kind of see why, but it was wrinkly lips. But these guys form these massive maternity colonies in the summer. So in Austin, at Congress Avenue Bridge, you have tons and tons of Mexican freetails. At Bracken Cave, a property that BCI owns, we have 20 million potentially Mexican freetail bats. So that's mamas, and then they usually have 1 pup each, which is really amazing. And these guys eat so many bugs. One study estimated they eat between 6,000 and 18,000 metric tons of bugs in Texas every year. So they're doing us this huge service, this huge pest control service. And they're also just really amazing, wonderful bats of Texas. And if you haven't been to a bat emergence, highly recommend going. It's really, really amazing to do. So there's the Congress Avenue Bat Colony, which we love in Austin. It makes us the Bat City, which is cool. And then this is Bracken Cave. And I just wanted to say, if you haven't been to Bracken, it's a really amazing experience. Kind of like, I don't know, I get the chills every time I see them come out. It's just so many bats, and there's all these hawks and peregrine falcons that are swooping down, trying to eat the bats. There's just so much going on. But you can visit Bracken if you are a BCI member. So feel free to join BCI, batcon.org. I don't know if I can, is that okay, Johanna, that I did that? Okay. Yeah, so if you join BCI, support our work, visit Bracken. We are doing member nights again. I think they're just at limited capacity right now because of COVID. Okay, so switching gears, what can I do on my property to help bats? That's a great question. I think the first thing people think about usually is building a bat house or buying a bat house, which is great. Can definitely do that. I'm going to email everybody who signed up for this webinar the 4-chambered nursery bat house plans, the blueprints that BCI recommends. We only recommend that type of bat house now. If you're buying one, you want to make sure it's that kind, because there's a lot of bat houses out there. Don't buy them on Amazon. Those are bad houses. They're not built right generally. And you want to make sure you have the right kind. Otherwise, the bats aren't going to occupy it. I always recommend batgoods.com is a great website because they donate a lot of their proceeds to bat conservation. I'm not associated with them in any way. I'm just a fan, but they have a great 4-chambered nursery house. You can also build them too. It's a really fun project. And maybe if you're home, for whatever reason, you have a little time, you could build a bat house. Very fun. We will say our plans are old and we need to update them. It does say you can use kind of mesh or screen on the inside of the bat house. We don't recommend that anymore. We found that as the bat houses deteriorate, the bats can get stuck in that. So what you want to do is just cut grooves in it or rough it up with sandpaper, and then the bats can hang on. There's a lot of people out there selling like bat spray, bat attractants. None of those work. It's all a scam. Don't waste your money. And you want to paint it the right color if you're building it, or if you're buying it, you want to make sure it's the right color. For our area of the country, you want it to be kind of a lighter colored paint, so like tan or a light brown, and that's going to kind of deflect some of that heat to make sure that it doesn't overheat. And then you want to install it properly. And this is hard because bats are very particular about what kind of bat house they want. And sometimes you can do everything right and you still won't get them. So it's a little bit, requires some patience. There's a little bit of nuance to it. They need about 6 to 8 hours of sun per day. So you really want to orient them east or south. You don't want to put them west. You don't want them to get that hot afternoon sun. That usually doesn't work. Don't place them on a tree. They're very susceptible to predators on trees. So you want to make sure that they're at least 20 to 30 feet away from a tree. I had one guy ask me if he should cut down a tree in his yard to put up a pole to put up a bat house, which is super frustrating because trees obviously provide a lot of bat habitat. So I would say keep your trees. And if you don't have space for a bat house, that's okay, because the trees are providing a lot of bat habitat just for different kinds of bats. You want the bat house to be at least 12 to 20 feet from the ground, because you want that space for the bats to be able to drop out and fly without any obstructions in the way. And then if you live near water, if you live near a lake, or if you have a big pond, that will really increase the chances of your bat house being occupied, because it's very convenient for the bats. But as I said, it just takes patience. Sometimes they can take, a year and a half to be occupied. So just kind of hang in there and keep trying and don't give up. But lucky for you, even if you don't have a bat house, you probably already have bat habitat, which is wonderful. And if you have trees, you're doing great. Trees are wonderful for a bunch of tree bats that I mentioned, but trees are also associated with a lot of different kinds of insects. You're providing all that bat food, which is fantastic. I will say if you have palm trees, now remember I mentioned the northern yellow bat is a palm tree bat, really likes to hang out in palms, and they will hang out in kind of this shaggy palm fronds that die that kind of hang down. And people usually want to cut those off to kind of make the palm tree look nice, but that is awesome bat habitat. So if you can keep your palms shaggy and convince your neighbors to do the same, that's really, really fantastic. And I think it looks fine personally, but that's just me. If you have dead trees or snags in your yard and you can leave them and they're not like a hazard, that's great too. Dead wood is a wonderful habitat for bats. It also attracts a lot of insects as well that bats are going to eat. And you also want to think about vertical layers when you're gardening for wildlife in general. And this is just kind of having something available at every layer of canopy and vegetation. So that's going to add a lot of different insect diversity to your yard, so a lot more bat food, but also a lot of different roosting options as well. It also kind of creates corridors too, just kind of in a vertical sense rather than horizontal. So vertical layers are really, really important. Okay, other tips. Don't use pesticides and herbicide. Great tip just generally for gardening for wildlife, but for bats especially, because even if they say it just kills mosquitoes, even if they say it's plant derived, it kills all the bugs, generally all the bugs, the bad ones and the good ones, and these are all bat food. So try to keep your yard herbicide and chemical free. Keep your cats indoors. This is great for all species of wildlife. Feral cats and outside cats eat a lot of birds, they eat a lot of lizards, and they will eat bats as well. So keep Fluffy indoors, and that's fantastic. A lot of people ask too, should I put lights up to attract bugs, which would attract bats? we thought about this a lot, and we kind of decided that lights can really disorient bats sometimes, and we really want them to focus on echolocating. So keeping your yard as dark as possible is probably the best thing to do. And if you have all these native plants and trees, you're going to have a lot of insects anyways. You don't need the lights to attract them. They're just going to be there. Okay, and then can you provide water for bats? It's a little more tricky. Bats usually kind of drink on the wing. They swoop down and drink. So they need about 10 feet of water to do that successfully usually. That's kind of an average. So if you put out a bird bath, that's probably not going to help bats. It's great for, other species of wildlife. It's always good to have water in your yard, especially in Texas. But if you have a pond, if it's a big pond, that's fantastic. But you don't really have to, it's a little bit trickier to kind of have water for bats specifically in your yard. But if you do have a large pond, you want to make sure you have ramps in it for all wildlife, just in case something falls in, bats, frogs, lots of different things. You just want to make sure wildlife can get out. And then lastly, I know there's a lot on this slide and there's a lot of thought put into it. I will say I'm working on a plant list with the Wildflower Center of gardening for bats in Texas. So I will email that to everybody. It's kind of a rough list, but we're just kind of putting this program together now. We're really trying to develop some gardening for bats materials, but I'm happy to share that with you as kind of our first attempt at figuring this out. But the way you want to think about it is you're just trying to attract as many different kinds of insects as possible, because you want to kind of have a bat buffet, basically. You want your yard to just provide as much bat food as possible. So you want flowers that are really fragrant, that are attracting a lot of insects, and also fruit too. So things that might be like a little stinky, kind of like manfreda is great. It's a little stinky, but bugs love it, and bats love bugs, so it works out. Bee brush smells amazing, I think. It attracts a lot of bugs too. Purple passion vine is very fragrant. And then fruits too, like Texas persimmon, kind of when that fruit gets ripe, and then even when it starts to rot, you're gonna get a lot of different bugs attracted to that, which is really wonderful for bats. You also wanna think about flowers that bloom kind of later in the day or at night, things that open up later in the day. So we have a lot of native 4 o'clocks, and then this Jimson weed, this guy here, is just beautiful white flower. So these are opening up right when the bats are kind of coming out to roost. So then it's attracting these pollinators at the perfect time for bats to feed, which is fantastic. So agave opens up at night, usually, or kind of later in the day. And then a lot of flowering trees don't really close their flowers at night either. So that's kind of another way to think about it, is things that don't really close their flowers at night. And those are all great to provide for bats too. It seems like moths especially like lighter colored flowers, and a lot of bats do kind of love moths probably the most. So having things that are kind of white or lighter colored is really great. And you can get really, really in the weeds about host plants for moths. Lynn and Jim Weber, who are wonderful naturalists in our area, they just came out with I guess it didn't just come out, it came out a while ago, butterfly host plant book for Central Texas, which is great. And I hear that they are working on a moth one, which hopefully will come out soon. And I'm really excited for that, because there really isn't like a moth host plant book, I guess because people don't like moths as much as butterflies, but bats do. So think about that. But there's a lot of information out there. You can get really into moth host plants. And then something you may not have thought of, but have probably been annoyed by many times, is that a lot of the pests in your garden are actually things that bugs or bats love to eat. So things that are on your kale, your cabbage, even your tomatoes, you get those tobacco hornworms that are gigantic. Those all turn into yummy moths that bats absolutely love. As I said, they eat a lot of ag pests, and those are all ag pests. So, if you can kind of keep your garden as organic as possible, that's great, because some of those moths are going to get eaten by bats, hopefully. Or if you're feeling really generous for some reason, and you want to plant a bunch of kale and just kind of forget about it, and just let the moths take over, that's great bat food. So that's something that's easy to do, and these are plants you can find anywhere. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was this idea of bloom time succession. And this is great for all wildlife, especially pollinators, but you just want to try to have something blooming every single month of the year if you can. And we can pretty much do this in Central Texas. It's a little hard in like the dead of winter and then the hot, hot summer, but we pretty much have stuff blooming most of the year, which is really cool. And we're really lucky to have that kind of climate. But things bloom really early, like elbow bush or golden groundsel or red bud are kind of the first things to bloom in the spring. And then there's things that bloom kind of only in the fall, like liatris. So you can kind of think about that as you're kind of setting up your wildlife habitat. Just try to have something to offer the pollinators all the time, because we don't really have very tough winters. So things are kind of looking for food constantly, and that includes bats as well. Okay, and then the last thing, yay, be a bat advocate. Bats are amazing. Hopefully I got that point across if I taught you anything today. Bats are amazing. They do awesome things for us, and they're just generally awesome. And you can be a bat advocate. You know, a lot of people are, as I said, are afraid of bats. There's a lot of misinformation right now about bats carrying COVID. Not true. Can't catch it from a bat. Can only catch it from people. But just generally, you know, tell people about bats. Tell people why you're putting up a bat house. Talk to your neighbors. Talk to your friends. You know, be a bat advocate, because every person you reach could potentially reach someone else, and it makes a really big difference. You know, the more bat advocates we have, the better. They're really wonderful species. There's so many different kinds, and we just want to preserve them and protect them. Okay, and then there's my email. There's our website. Our website has some great bat house information if you're interested in learning more about bat houses. Tons of information on our website. And feel free to email me as much as you want about anything bat related, and I can either answer it or find someone that can. Okay, that's it. Okay.
Awesome.
All right, so we have questions.
So, yeah, there are 2 questions there in the Q&A. The first one is, have you been getting more questions or queries or concerns regarding bats since COVID started? And what does COVID mean for BCI future plans?
Hey, that's a great question. Yeah, we have been getting, especially in the last couple of weeks, I would say, a lot more questions about COVID and bats. I think initially there were some, and then people kind of forgot about it, and then I think it's just been in the news again. So we're very much trying to address this. We actually have our chief scientist is going to be on CNN with Anderson Cooper coming up pretty soon. I'm not exactly sure when that is, but we're just trying to kind of get the right message out there and just tell people kind of what facts are actually available about COVID, because there's just so much we don't know yet. But for our future plans, you know, I think our goal is to just end bat extinctions worldwide, you know, and it sounds very lofty, but there's a lot of things we're doing in different countries, trying to preserve habitat, cave habitat, and just try to reach people. My job is the Bat Walk program coordinator, and that program is basically just teaching people to go and give bat walks and just connect the public to bats in a different way. So for us, you know, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing, but I think it just kind of adds more fuel to our mission, really, to get people to care about bats and to value them. Okay.
All right. The next one was regarding bloom succession. She asked, do the blooms need to be native? She's thinking of like pansies, snapdragons that bloom here in the wintertime. Are they also helpful?
Question. So those kind of blooms, you know, you'll attract kind of the more generalist pollinators like honeybees. You know, honeybees aren't native either, but they're really important pollinators. So, I mean, I think those are fine, but I would say, you know, always have native plants too, because there's so many native pollinators, you know, a lot of the kind of very solitary bees or beetles or things that we kind of overlook, you know, that are very specifically associated with our native plants. So it's good to have a mix, you know, but if you love snapdragons, that's fine. They're great too. Yeah.
Cool. Next we have, when will the plant list be finalized? He's excited to see it.
I'm glad. So I'm going to send it to you guys today. It's definitely not finalized. I think for now, I don't know exactly. That's a great question. I think we're still kind of working with the Wildflower Center and trying to figure out what the final product looks like. Hopefully we can partner with them. I'd love to do like a bat garden there. That's kind of, I haven't asked anyone there yet. That's just my secret dream. I'll talk to them about it at some point. But yeah, I think a lot of it is just talking to a lot of different experts about, you know, moth plants and other host plants and kind of what people have observed. And, you know, I just think it's kind of like putting together a ton of information and trying to kind of come up with something. But I think the Central Texas list will kind of have that in a really good place, hopefully in the next month or two. But the one I'm sending you guys, you know, is the horticulturist that helped me put it together. She was really thoughtful about it. So I do think it's really well done.
Cool. A lot of good questions coming in here. So next one is, does BCI have a presence in Asia?
We do. Yes, we absolutely do. We are international, so we are kind of all over the place. We actually have a really important project going on in Fiji where we worked with the Fijian government there to protect the last known roost of the Fijian free-tailed bat, which is a very endangered bat. And we helped the government kind of buy that property where the cave was. And now that roost is protected forever, which is exciting. We do a lot of work in Vietnam. We do a lot of work kind of all over Asia, and we have a lot of partners that we work with kind of all over the world. So yes, we are kind of everywhere. Yes.
Next up, any actions we can take to help prevent the spread of white nose syndrome?
That's a great question. Yes, absolutely. So I think what you want to do if you're going into a cave, you know, make sure, don't just go into a cave, first of all. You know, if you're going into a cave as part of like a caver group or a grotto group, you want to make sure you're cleaning all your gear as best you can. There's a lot of great resources out there. There's fightwns.org and then whitenose-syndrome.org. You can visit those websites, and they have some really specific information on how to clean your gear and what you should do. In Texas, you know, it's here, it's in our caves. It doesn't really impact the Mexican free-tailed bat because they don't hibernate, but they do have the fungus on them. So, you know, it's at Bracken, it's in Austin. So, you know, I think just telling people about it and what it is. And then the main thing you can do is just practice really good caving etiquette and just being really careful, because we don't want to spread that virus. Or sorry, not virus, fungus. Okay.
Next is, would you mind elaborating on the threats to bats or ranking them of which ones you think are greater, habitat destruction versus climate change versus wind, etc.? And they're especially interested in the threat of climate change and how it affects bats.
Okay, yeah, I mean, that's tough. I would say white nose is #1 for sure. Unfortunately, I think wind energy is probably tied with climate change. I hate to say that because, you know, renewable energy is kind of one of our answers to climate change, so it's pretty complicated. But I should say the wind industry is working to kind of figure this out, and we're working with them, as I said. You know, climate change, I think, is probably going to be more than wind energy soon, because it is just kind of this all-encompassing threat, and as kind of systems get destabilized, it's going to impact these species of wildlife that kind of depend on them and have kind of habituated to their behavior to how the system normally acts. So it's going to disrupt things in ways that's really hard to predict. And I know a lot of projects and bat research right now is kind of investigating the different ways that it impacts bats, but we're very much in kind of the beginning stages of understanding the full impacts of climate change. We just know that it's not good, basically. And then what was the other, was that the whole thing?
Yeah, how the potential impacts on humans for like, if the bats.
Yeah, well, one thing I will say with the habitat destruction part of that, I mean, habitat destruction is a huge issue, but just kind of COVID is a virus that potentially jumped from a wildlife species to humans. And that tends to happen more when there's more wildlife-human interactions. So kind of the more habitat that we destroy, the more likely we are to come in contact with more wildlife to potentially have these jumps happen. So it's really important now more than ever to preserve habitat and to kind of very carefully develop as much as we can. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a potential to impact humans in a lot of different ways, but just kind of smart habitat management and habitat preservation can really save us down the road from preventing another pandemic, possibly.
Cool. Next up is, can you recommend some resources for learning to ID bats?
Yeah, absolutely. Can I? Our website, batcon.org, we have species profiles for all the bats in North America, which is really great. It's a great way to look into just kind of first learning about things. There's a Texas Bats Field Guide by Merlin Tuttle, who is the founder of BCI. That's really wonderful. It's a little bit, I don't know if it's been updated in a few years, but it's a really great kind of first field guide, and it's wonderful that it's Texas specific. You know, it's hard to sometimes find field guides that are exactly for our area, which is great. I think those are probably two really good places to start. And then there's lots of great bat books out there, but you know, I think you can go to Project EduBat, which I can probably find. I'll send everyone, you know what, I'll just send in the email, when I send you guys the plant list and the bat house plans, I'll send some links to some different online bat resources where you can kind of learn more, if that's good. That's easy to do.
And then next one, if we were to raise moths, what species and where would we look to get them?
Wow, good question. I don't know. I would say, that's hard to say. You can raise sphinx moths very easily. They are the ones that are the tobacco hornworm caterpillar that are on your tomatoes. I have personally taken them off my tomatoes and put them in a little terrarium, and then you just feed them some tomato leaves and then you can watch them become moths, which is really cool. I don't think you're going to be able to raise enough moths to where it's really going to, you know, make a huge difference for bats in terms of just providing food. But if you have those native plants in your yard, you're going to have moths just happening anyway. So it's pretty easy way to just kind of do it without really having to do anything. But feel free, it's fun to watch the transformation. I would say if you have tomatoes, you'll probably get tobacco hornworm caterpillars, and they're hard to miss because they're giant. And then you can just put them in a terrarium and just make sure you kind of keep providing tomato leaves, and then eventually they'll go into their cocoon, and then they'll come out in about, I think, a week. And they're these beautiful sphinx moths. It's really fun. I did it with my son. He loved it.
And That has caught us caught up on everything that's been submitted so far. So
Awesome.
unless
Okay.
anybody has anything else.
Those are great questions, guys. Thank you.
Okay. Well, looks like we may have answered all the questions folks had. So
Okay.
thank you so much, Erin.
Yeah.
And we look forward to getting those resources from you.
Yes.
And
Writing it down to remind myself.
and your email address is right there on that final screen if anybody has continuing BAT questions or issues that come up. It's a great source of information, as is the Bat Conservation International's website. So I hope that this has been enjoyable and informative for everybody, and a great introduction to the bats we have here.
Thank you guys so much. Great questions. Appreciate it. Okay. All right, I guess, should we go? We're good?
All right.
Okay. Bye, guys.